Chapter 1013. At any time and in any era, the peak of the invincible realm meant the top combat capability in the dark world. On some specific battlefields, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm was almost synonymous with destroying the world. Before this saber strike, no one would associate this word with Wang Xiaoyao. The dark world had an impression of Wang Xiaoyao. King Xiaoyao of Beihai, Wang Tianzong's younger brother. No one would ignore such a figure. Before he broke with Mount Dibbing, in everyone's eyes, he was a relatively unrestrained figure. His prominent identity, gentle personality, generous way of doing things, and handsome appearance were all important reasons to make countless ladies fall in love with him. Wang Xiaoyao's life had always been unrestrained, but he had also done some absurd things. In conclusion, in the eyes of the dark world, Wang Xiaoyao was roughly a playboy of Beihai who had excellent martial arts talent but was not willing to work hard. Even if he could enter the invincible realm, this impression had not changed much. Until now. The saber of the peak of the invincible realm. The saber light all over the sky not only shattered the sword energy of Wuxia Xianxia, but also completely shattered the impression of him in the dark world. Beihai, which inherited swordsmanship, had produced many saber masters. But when it came to the saber of Beihai, people would think of DK, who was known as Heaven Saber, and Jianghu, who had double thunder veins. Even people's evaluation of Wang Xiaoyao was not as good as Jianghu, who was locked up in Beihai prison. This night, Wang Xiaoyao raised the blade in his hand and told the whole dark world the clearest fact. His name was Wang Xiaoyao. He was the only expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world. He was also the #1 saber grandmaster in the dark world. The saber light broke through the air. So close yet so far away. With almost incomprehensible power, the huge blade directly chopped down from above Wuxia Xianxia. It was swift, powerful, ruthless, and domineering. The saber light was blooming everywhere between heaven and earth. The saber light gushed from the ground and fell from the sky. Snowflakes scattered, and the sound of the wind was scattered. Vaguely, the ancient blade seemed to occupy the whole sky in an instant, chopping down with an unstoppable momentum. There seemed to be an error in perception. Mochizuki Seiko felt that his movements began to slow down. It was also like Wang Xiaoyao's saber was too fast. Within the range covered by the saber light, some rules about speed seemed to be modified a little. In a weak but extremely clear sense of disorder, Mochizuki Seiko lifted the sword edge. Clang! The huge blade slashed down on the sword's edge. Mochizuki Song's movement slowed down for a moment. Before she could raise the sword in her hand, the blade had already smashed down. At the same time, the saber radiance that filled the world vibrated. In the next instant, Mochizuki Song's body burst with blood. This was an absolute suppression of power. This was the absolute suppression of the saber gleam against the sword aura. In this state, even if Wang Xiaoyao was at the peak of the invincible realm, he could be regarded as an expert. Blood splashed in the saber light. Wang Xiaoyao's figure did not hesitate. With a flash of light, he held the hilt of the saber, and the huge blade directly stabbed Mochizuki Song's heart. Mochizuki Hikari, whose body was shaking violently, turned pale. The injuries she had been suppressing were almost completely unleashed by this slash. There were no fancy moves or changes in this slash. Tianya. This was one of the strongest moves in Wang Xiaoyao's martial arts that had gradually become a system of its own. It was also the simplest move. It was simple and didn't even have any changes. This was the perfect combination of the purest strength and speed, and it was also the essence of Beihai martial arts. In a space similar to a domain constructed by infinite saber light, when the opponent's perception of speed was wrong, this slash with pure strength and speed could completely crush everything. The blade came head-on. Mochizuki Song's violently shaking figure moved horizontally for a moment with difficulty. Before she could stand firm, Wang Xiaoyao, who had already appeared in front of her, fiercely chopped down again. It was like silver lightning splitting the sky. The moment the saber and the sword collided, Mochizuki Song, whose whole body was burning with sword energy, was directly chopped down from midair. Her body fell rapidly like a meteor. The saber was like thunder. She was like a fierce tiger. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were shining. Without the slightest hesitation, he held the saber and pounced straight down from the air. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's whole body carried a kind of undisguised wildness and insolence, like a beast hunting its prey. The two of them fell rapidly, one up and the other down. Wang Xiaoyao raised his saber. It was still chopping down. The moment Mochizuki Song's figure landed, she directly abandoned the so-called image and rolled on the ground. As soon as her body moved, the huge and bright saber directly chopped the ground from her side. Boom! The loud sound even suppressed all the sounds on Mount Dibbing not far away for a moment. Under the night sky, in the flying snow, the saber light stretched all the way from mid-air to the ground. The moment the saber chopped the ground, there was a loud sound like an explosion. The bright saber light bloomed unscrupulously and destroyed everything. The transparent shock wave mixed with the saber light spread out in all directions. The forest hundreds of meters nearby was completely torn apart by the crazy saber light in an instant. Tree trunks, leaves, and grass were all torn into powder. The ground collapsed, and the water under the ground suddenly sprayed into the sky under great pressure. A large pit of about 300 or 400 meters abruptly appeared on the flat ground. The water under the ground continued to spread up. Although Mochizuki Song's body avoided the saber, the huge force directly swept her into the air. At the moment when her body lost balance, Wang Xiaoyao, who was in a very stable state, flashed to Mochizuki Song again with a cold expression. Chopping, chopping, sweeping, and lifting. Countless attacks broke out at the same time like a storm. The saber and sword collided, and the saber light was unparalleled and fierce. Countless rays of light were surging and mighty. All the sword light was torn apart little by little again. This was a head-on suppression of strength, fair and square. She couldn't even find a chance to fight back. The saber light completely shattered the sword energy and completely enveloped Mochizuki Song. In an instant, Mochizuki Song, whose face was almost bloodless, raised the blade. 21st blade, shatter of land. The surging sword energy burst out from Mochizuki Song's body. She held cicada cry and stabbed forward. At the same time, the saber light all over the sky suddenly converged. The mountains and rivers were not broken, but they suddenly disappeared. Mochizuki Song, who stabbed forward, suddenly lost balance. Her swaying body staggered a step forward. The saber light swept over silently. Flaming Fire's face changed dramatically, regardless of the aggravation of her injury. She suddenly changed the attack direction of the blade, trying to block the blade sweeping over from the side. But she was still a second too late. Her body tried to dodge. The next moment, the saber light tore her flesh. Mochizuki Song's arm holding the sword suddenly rose into the sky. An extremely sharp killing intent suddenly came from a distance and firmly locked on Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao was not afraid at all. He turned and looked in the direction of Mount Dibbing. Facing His Majesty, the only one recognized by the dark world on Mount Dibbing, he laughed wildly. Li Tianlan, do you dare to fight with me? Chapter 10:14. Wang Xiaoyao's voice spread far away in the night with the power of the peak invincible realm. It was passionate and indulgent, like a thunder echoing near Mount Dibbing. Everyone on Mount Dibbing heard this sentence. It was a sentence that could be said to be overestimating one's capabilities, but it was also extremely provocative. Since Li Tianlan entered the secular world, he had met people he couldn't beat, but there was no one he didn't dare to beat. Wang Xiaoyao's words were tantamount to a great humiliation. Wind and snow filled the sky. A large expanse of wind and snow swirled wildly around Wang Xiaoyao's body. The ancient giant blade pointed at Li Tianlan from a distance. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's whole body was filled with an indescribable arrogance. On Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. His gaze pierced through the fluttering snow and saw the fresh blood in the snow. Mochizuki Song's arm fluttered in the air, and a large amount of blood flowed from her amputated arm. Under the immense pain, her face contorted slightly, and her condition fell to rock bottom in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao won. It was an incomparably straightforward suppression. What he won wasn't just victory or defeat, he also won life and death. With the ancient blade, he could take Mochizuki Song's life at any time. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Xiaoyao's saber quietly. He looked at Wang Xiaoyao's face. Wang Xiaoyao was also looking at him from afar with a sneer on his face. The moment Wang Xiaoyao cut off Moongaze and Song, the killing intent that almost froze the space came from Li Tianlan. No matter what had happened between Mochizuki Xianxia and Qin Weibai after the destruction of the Samsara Palace, her appearance here today had already shown her attitude. More than 2 years ago in Reki City, on the night of the trial day, Raphael of the Dark Knights almost saved Li Tianlan at the cost of serious injuries that he had not yet recovered from. Their friendship in the past meant that Li Tianlan could not watch Mochizuki Xianxia die. A warning from a few kilometers away was indeed a powerful deterrent. The perfection of Li Tianlan's martial arts and the power of ruthlessness were enough to allow Li Tianlan to appear in front of Wang Xiaoyao despite the distance of a few kilometers in an instant. At that time, Wang Xiaoyao's fate might not be better than Mochizuki Xianxia's. It might even be more miserable. But the problem was, did Li Tianlan dare? Wang Xiaoyao laughed more and more wildly. His low voice seemed very light in the night, but it echoed throughout the whole world. You don't dare, do you? Li Tianlan did not speak. Raging fire was everywhere on Mount Dibing. The fire spread and exploded in the air. This was almost the last power on Mount Dibing. Heaven Punishment Unit. To be more precise, they were the backup forces of the Heaven Punishment Troop. The genuine All Heavens Troop was fighting back against Kanglan Army. At the moment, those who were left on Mount Dibing were 200 reserve members of the All Heavens Troop, as well as 1 expert of the Half-Step Invincible Realm and 3 experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, who barely stayed after Wang Xingxiao had shown all his strength. This was all the power of Beihai on Mount Dibing. It seemed that since the establishment of the Wang family of Beihai, the force of Mount Dibing had never been so stretched. This was naturally due to the fact that the combined strength of the allied forces was too great. It was also because Wang Xiaoyao took away some high-end combat power. 200 fire-flaming realm experts cooperated with several experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm. Several experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm assisted the only expert of the Half-Step Invincible Realm. They barely formed a relatively smaller Heaven Punishment Sword formation. The tacit cooperation almost made more than 200 people completely become one person. The raging fire that was enough to burn everything kept sweeping. The entire Mount Dibing was within the scope of the sword formation. The sword energy shone in the sword formation. Li Tianlan, who was transformed by the startling sword, blocked Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurasumi alone in the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. Most of the power of the Heaven Punishment Sword formation was poured on Moraid. The saber light was invincible. Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the Half-Step Invincible Realm from the allied forces were almost unrestrained. Tianhai Wuji was the #1 expert in East Island. He was a great grandmaster of East Island who had entered the top 10 of the World Divine List 6 or 7 years ago. Although he had not officially stepped into the peak of the Invincible Realm, he was not far from that realm. The saber of Wuji Palace was swift and fierce. Tianhai Wuji personally took action, together with more than a dozen experts of the Invincible Realm. Almost at the moment of the battle, the reserve troop of the Heaven Punishment Force was shaky. The reserve force of the Heaven Punishment Force was constantly decreasing. The startling sword turned blue. The ruthless energy was not fast, but it was consumed very steadily. The sword formation of the 13-story buildings made Li Tianlan feel the ruthless state at any time. There were attacks from all directions. Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the Half-Step Invincible Realm were tearing the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. At the same time, they were also cooperating with Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurasumi to interfere with Li Tianlan's famous sword doppelganger. Everyone could see that the power of Mount Dibing was hard to hold on. If several experts of the Invincible Realm broke out with all their strength, Li Tianlan's famous sword doppelganger could retreat unscathed, but the All-Heaven Sword formation was destined to suffer heavy losses. In its heyday, the full All-Heaven Sword formation could fight against experts at the peak of the Invincible Realm. But now the reserve force of the All-Heaven Sword formation was different. For the real All-Heaven army, the number of people was reduced by a third, and the number of experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm was even lower. They were not only facing Moraid, who was infinitely close to the peak of the Invincible Realm, but also Tianhai Wuji and more than a dozen experts of the half-step Invincible Realm. It was impossible for the All-Heaven Sword formation to resist. Wang Xingxiao's original plan was to use the All-Heaven Sword formation as a supplement and the absolute strong firepower coverage of Mount Dibbing as the main force. At the beginning of the final battle, as soon as the communication was restored, Mount Dibbing had already started all the weapon systems and strictly planned the range and firepower. In the many simulations in advance, even if it was the worst result, the situation would be beneficial to Beihai. Of course, Wang Xingxiao could think of East Island. With the support of his expectations and the results of many simulations, Mount Dibbing was almost sure that even if they were attacked by the firepower of East Island, the fully activated weapon systems of Mount Dibbing were enough to cause a fatal threat to several experts of the Invincible Realm on the mountain at this time. Even if they couldn't hurt Jianghu, when thousands of weapon terminals burst out at the same time, they could consume most of Jianghu's physical strength. East Island had an accident before the war, and the weapon control system hadn't been taken back yet. What was even more ridiculous was that East Island hadn't found it yet. Wang Xingxiao looked calm and collected, but he was ecstatic in his heart. More than once, he complained that the other side was a complete idiot. His wealth had been F*King emptied, but he still didn't know it. He was simply a weirdo in the international history of the past 100 years. And because of this, he was more confident in the final battle. Without the threat from East Island, the weapons on Mount Dibbing could crush everything without any scruples. This was the best situation. Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jianghu, Moraid, Jianghu, and Wang Xiaoyao. Joint forces. Such a lineup was indeed suffocating. But once the weapon system on Mount Dibbing started firing, Wang Xingxiao could be sure that at least the weakest Yagyu Kurumi and Jianghu were doomed to die, unless Jianghu saved them at the cost of his physical strength. When the suppression of firepower was over, the forces of all heavens could come out to clean up the mess and further weaken their state and physical strength. Then it was time for Li Tianlan to come in and harvest this era. But Wang Xingxiao didn't expect that when several Invincible Realm experts stepped into the range of firepower, nothing happened on Mount Dibbing. Wu Qingwu, who had been the most loyal to Mount Dibbing, was missing. All the weapon systems in Beihai were locked. Although Wang Xiaoyao was temporarily stalled by Moongei's song, the forces of all heavens were going to face several Invincible Realm experts in their heyday. Such a situation was undoubtedly a bolt from the blue for Wang Xingxiao. Wu Qingwu. This uncle whom he had always trusted the most stabbed him in the back when he needed strength the most. A near-fatal stab. The situation in front of him was slowly collapsing at an unchangeable speed. Wang Xingxiao suddenly glanced at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood where he was in silence, motionless. Wang Xingxiao understood Li Tianlan's difficulties very well. As East Emperor, he was really in a difficult position now. The collapse of Mount Dibbing was happening little by little. But until now, Jianghu had not made a move. He quietly floated in the air, observing Mount Dibbing, Li Tianlan, and Wang Xingxiao, with a kind of calmness that everything was under control. With the power of the joint forces at this time, they could speed up the collapse of Mount Dibbing several times, even dozens of times. If several Invincible Realm experts were willing to pay some price, such as some moderate injuries, they could even make the situation of Mount Dibbing collapse in an instant and destroy all the forces that could resist on Mount Dibbing. But they had never done so. From beginning to end. Because once the Sky Punishment Sword formation was broken, they would face Li Tianlan with all his strength. Because Jianghu had not made a move yet. And because Li Guangtu had not appeared yet. Wang Xingxiao's eyes were a little self-deprecating and sarcastic. Obviously, in the hearts of the joint forces at this time, although this was the final battle of Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai was no longer important. This had become the battlefield against the young East Emperor. So the joint forces were deliberately pulling the battle situation. The key to breaking the situation was the battle between Moongei's Song and Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao had the ability to kill Moongei's Song. Li Tianlan had the ability and reason to save Moongei's Song from Wang Xiaoyao. When the battle situation was in a stalemate, once Moongei's Song was in a life-or-death crisis and Li Tianlan tried his best to kill Wang Xiaoyao, it was likely that Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu would break out with all their strength. The final result of the final battle of Beihai was the moment that could happen at any time. So the battle situation on Mount Dibing was in a stalemate. Tianhai Wuji was not in a hurry to break the situation. And Wang Xiaoyao was not in a hurry to kill Moongei's Song. He used himself as bait to provoke Li Tianlan. Waiting for Li Tianlan to take the bait. He was a real expert at the peak of the invincible realm. And judging from the strength he had hidden for a long time and exposed at this time, even among the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, he was not weak. If Li Tianlan wanted to injure or even kill him in an instant, he had to do it in person, or he had to break out his energy mercilessly. Wang Xiaoyao was the only expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the dark world. Such a Wang Xiaoyao was much more difficult to deal with than Gu Xingyun. Li Tianlan could only choose one of them. Wang Yuesong had to be saved. No matter which one Li Tianlan chose, it was completely acceptable to the joint forces. If Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, who were probably nearby, attacked with all their strength at the same time, Li Tianlan was likely to die on the spot. At worst, he would be seriously injured and have to withdraw from the battle in North Sea. If Wu Qing took action, he would have to bear the full force of Wang Xiaoyao's outburst. Coupled with the cooperation of Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, even if Wu Qing could save Meng Xiang'e, he would inevitably exhaust all his energy. At that time, Tianhai Wuji would break the deadlock and Li Tianlan would have to face a siege. Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu. Two superiors who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao was at the peak of the invincible realm. Tianhai Wuji and Moraid were close to the peak of the invincible realm. Jiang Guochu and Yagyu Kurumi were two invincible realm experts. And more than a dozen top superiors of the half-step invincible realm. This lineup was almost more exaggerated than the one that besieged Wang Tianzong in Mormons. Without ruthlessness, it was impossible for Li Tianlan to block it. The joint forces didn't even need to pay a price to heavily injure him. How could Li Tianlan choose? Give up Meng Xiang'e? According to Wang Xingxiao's understanding of him, this option almost didn't exist. In contrast, it was more likely for Li Tianlan to give up the final battle in Beihai. Wang Xingxiao sighed softly. His body slowly moved forward in the air, passing by the silent Li Tianlan. Second uncle. His voice spread far away in the night with the wind and snow. This was the darkest time before dawn. Wang Xingxiao's voice was steady and calm. Let me play with you. Countless eyes focused on Wang Xingxiao at once. Jiang Shangyu, Moraid, Tianhai Wuji, the eyes of several superiors of the invincible realm froze at the same time. On the stalemate battlefield, the pressure on the troops of all heavens and aquamarine suddenly relaxed for a moment. In the next second, all eyes shifted away from Wang Xingxiao. With Wang Xingxiao hiding his strength before, the moment Wang Xingxiao spoke, everyone thought that Wang Xingxiao was also hiding his strength. However, at this time, he just stood there, showing the aura of the half-step invincible realm. The strength of the half-step invincible realm was already unexpected. But to play with Wang Xiaoyao? Wang Xiaoyao stood in the air, and the eyes of uncle and nephew collided fiercely with each other thousands of meters away. Wang Xingxiao smiled and said softly, "Do you deserve it? If you can't afford to play, you will die. Whoever can't afford to play will die." Wang Xingxiao looked at Wang Xiaoyao and said softly. Wang Xiaoyao sneered. His eyes passed over Wang Xingxiao and locked on Li Tianlan. At this point, he indeed had the capital to look down on Wang Xingxiao. Wang Shuang's slightly trembling body was lying in front of Wang Xianxia at this time, and the broken arm was still sprinkled with blood. The blade was placed above Wang Shuang's head. Wang Xianxia looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold voice, "I'll count to 3. If you don't come, she will die." 3. Li Tianlan suddenly narrowed his eyes. The 13 floors kept rotating around him, getting clearer and clearer. He knew Wang Xiaoyao's plan. But there were some things that one couldn't avoid being fooled after knowing. This was an overt plot on the battlefield. Wang Xiaoyao twitched the corner of his mouth and said directly, 1. There was no 2. As his voice fell, the ancient giant blade suddenly pressed down. Wang Xiaoyao. Suddenly, a huge resistance came from the edge of the blade. Amidst the snow, Mochizuki Song suddenly stretched out his hand and blocked the blade that was pressing down. An unprecedented aura suddenly rose from Wang Shuang's body. It was indifferent, fake, but it continued to grow stronger. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and seemed a little surprised. Crack. At the same time, in the cabin of the helicopter over East Island, Xianyuan Wushang, who had been watching the scene of Mount Dibbing, suddenly twisted the bottle of pure water in his hand. He stared at Wang Shuanga on the screen, stunned, and stood up subconsciously. "What's this?" He subconsciously cried out in surprise. "Fraud," Xing Tian said in a deep voice. Chapter 10-15. Fraud. Fraud. Xianyuan Wushang unconsciously wiped the pure water that he had sprayed on himself because he was too excited. He muttered to himself. After a long while, he looked at Xing Tian. "Are you kidding me?" "That's the truth." Xing Tian's voice was low and solemn. "Young master, I'm more sensitive than you in this regard. I'm sure that her current state is fraud." All the astonishment and disbelief on Xianyuan Wushang's chubby face gradually disappeared. His harmless face gradually became serious. Xing Tian did not move. The young master in front of him, who might be very funny and didn't care about his image, had a majesty that made people unable to look at him directly once he became serious. But the environment here is not right. This is even more incredible than when Big Brother defeated Jianghu. No. It's not incredible. It's completely impossible. Xing Tian lowered his head and wanted to say something but stopped. "What do you want to say?" Xianyuan Wushang rolled his eyes. There was a trace of light in his usually innocent eyes. "There's a precedent for a similar situation," Xing Tian whispered. "Who?" Xianyuan Wushang raised his eyebrows. "Duke guarding Duke." Xing Tian's voice was filled with awe. The corner of Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched. It seemed that he wanted to curse, but after twitching for a long time, he didn't say anything in the end. The so-called Duke guarding Duke was not a person. Perhaps it was a person, but under such circumstances, the identity that Xing Tian mentioned represented a group of people. But no matter which one of those people, what right did the Song of the Full Moon have to compare with them? "You," Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and slowly spat out a noun that he had just learned. "Are you bullshitting me?" "If it exists, it makes sense," Xing Tian said in a low, muffled voice. Xianyuan Wushang stood motionless and was silent for a long time. "Maybe when this is over, I should talk to sister-in-law." He whispered to himself, "It's the sleeping sister-in-law. If there's anything special about the Song of the Full Moon, it's probably that she used to follow sister-in-law all year round. This is an unexpected discovery. You can mention it at the next meeting. Maybe someone will be interested in it." Xing Tian said softly. "This is not a good thing." Xianyuan Wushang said expressionlessly, "This is not a good thing for anyone, so there is no need to mention it." He looked at Xing Tian and said calmly, "Keep this a secret." "Yes." Xing Tian lowered his head. Fraud, tisk, Xianyuan Wushang muttered to himself. In the end, he shook his head and sighed. What came to his mind was the glorious history of this word, which was enough to make one's blood boil. He looked at the receding night under the helicopter. This was the place he had always dreamed of, but at this time, when he saw the Plenilun him and Li Tianlan, he sincerely sighed and said, "I miss home." Xing Tian looked at him silently. After a while, he said, "Me too." The corners of Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes twitched slightly. Only then did he remember his mission. He wouldn't stay here for long and would return soon. As for Xing Tian, wow, this is so bitter, so miserable. Ahem, Xianyuan Wuxiang coughed and stiffly changed the topic. Now that I think about it, Duke guarding Duke's daughter is really beautiful. I haven't seen her for a long time. Xing Tian's voice was calm. Xianyuan Wuxiang was speechless. The helicopter flew through the night and approached Ninghu. The sound of fighting rang from a distance. This was their second stop after arriving in East Island. The two successfully met with Situ Xianxia 2 hours ago and completely stabilized the situation. The headquarters of Wuji Palace, which was almost empty, was almost completely destroyed. The remaining forces fled. Situ Xianxia was concentrating on dealing with the mess. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who had been controlling all the communications in East Island, immediately noticed the abnormality in the headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School and rushed over without hesitation. The headquarters of Jifeng Sword Raining School in Ninghu was already a mess. Fighting and chaos spread rapidly. This place, which was supposed to be defenseless, had now become the biggest trap of East Island. Yagyut Sangshuan, the leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School, was a disciple of Jiang Shangyu. If there were benefits, he would naturally give them to his own people and allies. Therefore, as early as a few days ago, all the 2,000 saint warriors that Jiang Shangyu borrowed from the Holy Land were placed in Jifeng Sword Raining School, including the commander of the 2,000 saint warriors, Gravich, who was now the new commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps of the Holy Land. After the chaos in Snow Country, for more than 2 years, the Holy Land had done everything to cultivate a new invincible realm expert. Therefore, when Saint led the Nightmare Army to attack Jifeng Sword Raining School, it was tantamount to stepping directly into Jiang Shangyu's trap. On the side of Wuji Palace, the other side was retreating. On the side of Jifeng Sword Raining School, the fierce fighting had continued from the beginning to the present. Not only did the Nightmare Army of Emperor Dong's palace not gain the upper hand, but it was also vaguely suppressed by the Holy Disarmament Corps. The only thing that could stabilize the morale of the Nightmare Army was the battle of the invincible realm experts. The shining sword energy collided wildly with the domain. When Xianyuan Wuxiang arrived, the battle between Saint and Gravich had almost reached its climax. The constantly surging domain and the crisscrossing sword energy almost affected the nearby space. Even the flight of the helicopter became a little unstable. Is this the invincible realm? Xianyuan Wuxiang whispered to himself and glanced at Xing Tian. Xing Tian looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang silently, as if he was still immersed in the mood of wanting to go back. The atmosphere in the cabin was silent and awkward. Xianyuan Wuxiang looked at the battle on the ground that had casualties and frowned slightly. That man. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly pointed at Gravich, who was entangled with Saint. I don't like him. Xing Tian was a little confused. Don't you King want to be a PE teacher in Tiannan? Then why don't you show your skills to Emperor Dong's palace? Otherwise, you will be sent to be a security guard sooner or later. Xianyuan Wuxiang scolded him jokingly and kicked Xing Tian's leg. His finger was still pointing at Gravich. Make him disappear. Xing Tian, who was kicked, didn't shake at all. He thought about it seriously, nodded, and opened the door of the helicopter. The battle between the two invincible realm experts became more and more intense. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes subconsciously. His eyes fell on Gravich. This new invincible realm expert, who had been cultivated by the Holy Land at all costs for 2 years, was tall and straight, and his blonde hair was like a burning fire. Although he was at a disadvantage in the battle with Saint after the spirit coronation, his absolutely sharp spiritual willpower after the coronation made his reaction extremely fast. Now, although he was injured, he didn't show any signs of defeat. The moment Xing Tian's eyes fell on him, Gravich suddenly turned back and also locked his eyes on Xing Tian. Their eyes met in midair for a moment. Out of an instinctive reaction, Gravich's hair suddenly stood on end. The instinctive sense of danger seemed to pierce into his body in an instant, deep into his internal organs, bone marrow, and every drop of blood. Xing Tian in his sight seemed to be a huge beast that was countless times more dangerous than Saint. Danger was screaming. But in his perception, Saint's huge figure had no aura at all. His tall body bent slightly and walked out of the cabin. The wind roared, the domain raged, and the sword energy flew. He stood in midair, motionless. Without any hesitation, the domain around Gravich suddenly expanded, and the extreme eruption of power temporarily forced military counselor to retreat. Gravich turned around and ran without hesitation. Dignity, reputation, glory, status, and everything else, provided that he was alive. He didn't know why he was afraid, but the moment he saw Xing Tian, every cell in his body seemed to remind him that death was close at hand. He used all of his power to strengthen his domain. He didn't have any fighting spirit. He only thought about running for his life. The domain squeezed the space and became more and more condensed. In the shortest time, it directly solidified to the limit. Xing Tian narrowed his eyes and stretched out his hands. His aura was still calm. But as he stretched out his hands, the whole space suddenly let out an extremely harsh and sharp whistle. Xing Tian's palms were empty. In the eyes of everyone who saw this scene, the night sky seemed to be clearly deformed in Xing Tian's hands. The endless night turned into a giant bow nearly 3 meters long. He drew the bow and put the arrow on it. The night winds suddenly disappeared, and the night was suddenly chaotic. Xing Tian, who had no aura from beginning to end, stood in the air like an ordinary person. The giant bow condensed by the night was as black as ink in his hand. The dark bowstring was pulled back for a moment. He loosened his palm. The giant bow suddenly dissipated. There were no arrows in the air. But heaven and earth were completely quiet. The night was frozen, and there was no wind or snow. It was dead silent. Gravich, who had escaped hundreds of meters away, turned around in horror. He opened his mouth and shouted something. It seemed that he was begging, cursing, and cursing. What he saw was only the back of Xing Tian, who bent over and curled back into the cabin. In his sight, his domain began to break without any stagnation. It was broken in all directions. The solid domain seemed to have encountered an invisible force and was shattered into powder without resistance in an instant. It was silent. The broken domain completely swallowed up Gravich's figure. Gravich's figure disappeared. It looked like his figure was completely swallowed up by the broken domain. There was no blood, no light, and nothing. An invincible realm expert just disappeared. The headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School was dead silent. Boom! After the invisible arrow, there was a sudden burst of real thunder in the night sky. Lightning cut through the sky. The winter thunder rumbled. Before dawn, it began to rain in Ninghu. Xing Tian got back into the cabin and sat down in a corner. He was ordinary and had no momentum before killing people. After killing people, he was still ordinary and had no momentum. His body was too big, so he looked like a doormat when he was nestled in the cabin. Good job. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes wandered, and his voice was a little erratic. Xing Xianxia raised his head subconsciously, but he saw that his little master's eyes had moved from Beihai on the screen of the cabin to the window. The battle at the headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School suddenly became fierce. With the death of Gravich, the Nightmare Army was full of momentum, and its morale rose sharply. And there was an obvious break in the rhythm of the battle of the Holy Disarmament Corps. He disappeared from this world without a sound. Gravich, a new invincible realm expert cultivated by the sanctuary, was even more miserable than Absolute, who died in Li Tianlan's hands with one punch. He came to East Island with hidden strength and died silently. From beginning to end, he could be said to be a nobody. The helicopter hovered over Jianghu Sword Training School. The rain under the night gradually accelerated. Saint stood in the air and was silent for 2 minutes. Through the cabin, Xianyuan Wuxiang stared at Saint for 2 minutes without blinking. His eyes were a little excited, a little guilty, and a little grateful. "Young master." Xing Tian let out a muffled cry. "Yes." Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded and then shook his head. He seemed to know that something was wrong with his state. He rubbed his face hard and whispered, "Xing Tian, do you know what the biggest sorrow of a doctor is?" Xing Tian was stunned. The young master in front of him was different from him. He came here with his own mission, so he could teach sports, be a gatekeeper, be a beggar, be a security guard, or do anything. He had shown his strength tonight and could be valued by Emperor Dong's palace. If there were no accidents, he would not have a chance to do anything for a long time until he left. And the young master in front of him. His combat capability was not zero, but he was really a doctor. Maybe this doctor was more high-end than Emperor Dong's palace, but a doctor was a doctor. Xianyuan Wuxiang's problem seemed to have involved the meaning of his job. Xing Tian hesitated and did not speak. The biggest sorrow of a doctor is to see his comrades die slowly, but he can do nothing but watch. Xianyuan Wuxiang looked at Saint outside the window with a complicated expression. Many years ago, he pointed at Saint and said, "I have a comrade who looks like him." Xing Tian glanced at Saint outside the window and still did not speak. Xianyuan Wuxiang took a deep breath and exhaled. "Ask him to come and sit down." Xianyuan Wuxiang said, "Prepare a pot of good tea." "Now?" Xing Tian confirmed once more. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded and said, "I am a doctor. You can tell him that even if he does not participate in the underground battle, we will win. And from now on, there will be no more casualties in Emperor Dong's palace." Stillness. In front of Mount Dibing, the battle, which could be said to be the key to breaking the stalemate in everyone's eyes, suddenly stopped. The wind and snow were still, the knife light was still, the blood was still, and the blade was still. Everything seemed to be frozen for a moment. This strange scene even made the chaotic battle on Mount Dibing stop. All the Invincible Realm experts fixed their eyes on Wuxia Xianxia and Wang Xiaoyao. The blood-stained Jianghu maintained the downward chopping posture, and the sharp blade was less than 30 centimeters away from Wuxia Xianxia's head. Wuxia Xianxia reached out her hand. To be exact, it was a finger. She raised her only left hand, and her slender, pale, and beautiful finger gently tapped the blade. Then everything suddenly stopped. Heaven and earth seemed to become extremely quiet at this moment. Jiang Shangyu frowned tightly. Through the distance, she silently looked at the knife in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. An indescribable feeling naturally rose in her heart. He saw Wuxia Xianxia open her hands. Her 5 fingers pinched the blade in an extremely tough yet delicate manner. Not only was Wang Xiaoyao's blade unable to move an inch, but the entire world seemed to have been completely frozen. Moraid's face was a little pale. He thought of the fight with the master of Samsara Palace in Snow Country. As Jiang Shangyu's true confidant, after Mormon's Sword of Eternity ended, Moraid naturally confirmed that it was Wuxia Xianxia who had fought with him. At that time, Wuxia Xianxia was clearly not his opponent. But now, he gritted his teeth fiercely. In his sight, Wuxia Xianxia stretched out her fist. Her clenched fist was delicate and small, but extremely domineering. It was obviously a body of flesh and blood, but the fist hit the blade hard, and then everything froze there. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Tsangxuan looked at each other. These two brothers, who were competitors and had deep personal grudges against each other, yet were always able to maintain a tacit understanding at crucial moments, looked at each other. In their line of sight, Moon-gazing Cord's finger lightly tapped the edge of the blade, and then the world seemed to completely freeze. Wang Xiaoyao did not move. He maintained the downward chopping motion, stiff there. In his sight, Wuxia Xianxia stood up and took a small step back. It was just a small step, but the surrounding environment suddenly changed. Wang Xiaoyao found that he could no longer lock on to Wuxia Xianxia's figure. An invisible resistance firmly blocked the blade in his hand. There was no way for his knife to move down even 1 centimeter. Chaos, distortion, different perspectives, different pictures, but the same result. In the air above Mount Dibing, Li Tianlan, who had been ready to attack with all his strength, stopped and looked at Wang Xiaoyao and flaming fire in the distance. The sword intent in his eyes flowed, and the 13th flight shook gently. Perhaps the picture in his eyes was the clearest and most realistic. The most realistic picture was that flaming fire did not move. She did not stretch out her fingers, clench her fists, or get up. She just slowly got up and moved a step to the left, shaking. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Wuxia Xianxia kept breathing deeply, and an extremely horrible aura surged wildly in her body. Her eyes were blood red in an instant. She was the strongest super master of Samsara Palace, Qin Weibai's right-hand woman, and the master of Samsara Palace. She was now the Dark Queen of the Dark Knights. Even if she was injured, she was still a big shot standing at the top of the Dark World. She had come here for the sake of their past friendship and for the future. She had come here to help, not to be a burden. Wuxia Xianxia did not mind that one of her arms was cut off. What she could not accept most was that she was used as a bargaining chip to threaten Li Tianlan. If such a thing happened, she might as well not come. She came to help. During the brief confrontation between Wang Xiaoyao and Li Tianlan, this was the only thought in Wuxia Xianxia's mind. Just like how Li Tianlan could enter Jiang Shangyu's shadow without knowing why. Wuxia Xianxia herself could not tell what state she was in now. The only thing she could do was to overdraft her potential and body at all costs in that instant. This kind of extreme overdraft was a step further than an all-out explosion. It was almost as if she was burning herself without caring about the consequences, so that her scarred body could withstand the power of her peak or even surpass it. She did not expect that when she completely overdrew herself, it would form such a situation. It felt like space was divided into countless mirrors, and every subtle movement of hers was reflected by pieces of mirror-like space with extensibility. Space was torn apart little by little, and countless spaces were like countless mirrors. In the wind and snow, under the blade, Wuxia Xianxia felt like she was standing in a room full of mirrors. Her movement of getting up continued to extend in the mirror, turning into a gesture of reaching out and clenching a fist. The movement of raising her hand turned into an outstretched finger. She stood up, but in the mirror, she moved to the left and right. All this was vague and unreal in Wuxia Xianxia's perception. For a short moment, she could not figure out whether space was distorted and divided or her spirit was distorted and divided. The erupting sword energy kept rushing out of her body. Everything around her was completely distorted. The most illusory was distorted into reality, and the most real her was distorted into an illusion. She was here, but what everyone saw in their consciousness was all an illusion. The whole process was very simple in Wuxia Xianxia's eyes. The moment Wang Xiaoyao's blade came down, he suddenly paused. At that time, he seemed to have seen something. Song of the Full Moon used that moment to dodge the blade and stand up. Space was distorted and divided. Many things happened in that moment, but in fact, nothing happened. It was just a simple dodge. The pale Wuxia Xianxia stood up straight. Her aura was getting stronger and stronger. Overdrawing her body to the limit would make her injuries worse, but at this time, it also gave her power beyond her peak. It was a completely unintentional transformation. The outburst in the desperate situation greatly increased the burden on her body, but the twisted sword intent split the space. In a short period of time, it affected everyone in a way that seemed both coincidental and inevitable that they could not come into contact with. Wuxia Xianxia dodged the blade and stood up. Her body began to recover. Or, she was overdrawing. She kept overdrawing. The sword energy was surging in her body like a mighty torrent. At this moment, Flaming Fire's swordsmanship was real, but she temporarily stood at the peak of the invincible realm. The will that was absolutely concentrated in essence, qi, and spirit was not so much supporting her body. It was better to say that Wuxia Xianxia deceived her body and every organ in her body. She overdrew her body so that every organ, every joint, every drop of blood, and every cell in her body thought that she was in her peak state. So her body was overdrawn, and her sword energy recovered. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. She confused the enemy in the shortest time. She also deceived herself in the shortest time. Only her spirit was still calm and rational. It was hard for Wuxia Xianxia to explain and figure out everything for the time being. If she used the most authoritative words to explain it, it was deception. For Xianyuan Wushang, it was very important. For Wuxia Xianxia, she just didn't want to be a burden. Your opponent, the endless surging aura broke through the wind and snow and rushed to the sky. Wuxia Xianxia's cold voice rang out. It's me. The recovering sword energy broke through to a new peak at an incredible speed in an instant. Frozen, disordered, and still, everything returned to normal in an instant. The blade of Jianghu, the famous saber, trembled slightly, and the downward slash turned into a horizontal sweep. The moment he locked onto Wuxia Xianxia's position again, Wang Xiaoyao didn't hesitate and used all his strength to break out completely. He didn't figure out what had just happened, but he didn't like any variables. He hadn't been at the peak of the invincible realm for a long time, less than half a year. This was originally his biggest trump card, and it directly crushed Wuxia Xianxia at the beginning of the battle. If it hadn't been for the accident just now, the final battle in Beihai might have been over by now, and Li Tianlan would have died. A battle at this level needed an opportunity. The so-called victory or defeat, or even life and death, was often decided in an instant. Li Tianlan wanted to save Wuxia Xianxia, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Wang Xiaoyao. These three people could almost represent the top combat strength in the dark world today. They were very likely to be able to injure or even kill Li Tianlan in an instant. This shouldn't have been an accident. But the accident happened just like that. Wuxia Xianxia actually struggled to find a way out in a desperate situation. He wasn't very upset or frustrated, but at this moment, Wang Xiaoyao's killing intent really reached an unprecedented peak. He wanted to do something for Beihai, and this was the closest he had ever been to success. Wuxia Xianxia couldn't stop him, and no one could stop him. He was the only one who could make Beihai better. The dazzling broadsword light suddenly drew a natural arc. Wang Xiaoyao's figure shuttled quickly. With just a slight flash, he and the broadsword light had arrived in front of Wuxia Xianxia at the same time. The dazzling brilliance flashed. Wuxia Xianxia, who only had his left hand left, but his aura was stronger than before. He held cicada cry and stabbed forward. A stream of sword energy with endless sharpness suddenly collided with the broadsword light. There was no crushing and suppression. It was a completely evenly matched scene. The crazy friction between the sword light and the broadsword light brought about a loud noise that almost tore the space apart. The two figures quickly drew closer. No one retreated. They pulled out their broadswords and pulled out their swords. The fierce collision of the broadsword and the sword sounded in an instant. The changes of the 24 moves of sword in Wuxia Xianxia seemed to have reached the extreme. In the sky and on the ground, the sword light flew. The vast and endless sword energy condensed into beams of light one after another, constantly flashing in the air. However, Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes had become completely gloomy and indifferent, suddenly calmed down a lot. His figure was attacking. Attack, attack, attack. The two of them maintained the shortest distance between each other. The sword and the sword collided countless times. The huge blade in Wang Xiaoyao's hand was like a delicate dagger at this time, sticking close to Wang Yue and him's as he waved them around. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao didn't have any extra movements. The originally extremely violent and arrogant broadsword technique suddenly went to another extreme. His movements became extremely concise, and the absolute conciseness brought about incredible smoothness. Close to Wuxia Xianxia, his attacks were like a storm. Although he couldn't completely crush Wuxia Xianxia, as time went by, Wang Xiaoyao once again mastered the attack rhythm. On Mount Dibbing, Wang Xingxiao's tense body slightly relaxed for a moment. He frowned and said, "What just happened?" Li Tianlan shook his head silently. In the situation just now, except for Wuxia Xianxia, perhaps only Li Tianlan could see clearly what was going on. He could clearly see every movement of Wuxia Xianxia, and also the mirror-like space around Wuxia Xianxia. His perception seemed to be focused on the mirror around Wuxia Xianxia for a few seconds, but his eyes could clearly see the most real state of Wuxia Xianxia. He didn't know what was going on either. It was as if everyone's perception had been deceived in that instant, but it wasn't the kind of hypnotic power that came from the mind. It was more like an interesting use of power. Fire flaming has broken through? Wang Xingxiao looked at Wuxia Xianxia and asked strangely. It's temporary. Li Tianlan said lightly, it's still a little bit away from a real breakthrough, a little bit. The battle in his sight was still going on. Wang Xiaoyao's movements became more and more concise and smooth. In the shining light, he strode forward, ignoring everything. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly, and he shook his head subconsciously. Flaming fire now temporarily had the strength of the peak of the invincible realm, but it didn't mean that she could beat Wang Xiaoyao. The 24 moves of sword was the supreme sword technique of the Dark World, as famous as the Sword of Six Paths of Reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In terms of inheritance, the 24 moves of sword was undoubtedly better than Wang Xiaoyao, who followed the path of the predecessors and finally perfected his martial arts bit by bit. But Flaming Fire's most fatal flaw at this time was her injury. The injury that she had suppressed before she came here slightly affected her state. As for the external injury, after losing the right arm that she was most used to using the sword, Wuxia Xianxia's movements were always very strange. Compared to usual, her movements were a little more complicated. Wang Xiaoyao's martial arts were flawed. At the very least, Li Tianlan could see the occasional flaw in Wang Xiaoyao's simple, smooth, and almost perfect movements. Such a flaw could be tested when Song of the Full Moon entered the peak of the invincible realm and was in good condition. But now, Wuxia Xianxia might be able to see it. But her movement speed couldn't keep up with her eyesight. Li Tianlan was silent for a while, and then sighed softly. He didn't expect that the situation would become so passive. Qiushui, Tongtian, Kanglan, Empress, and Lapis Lazuli. The situation in these cities was not unexpected. The power of the joint forces was too strong. In the early stage of the final battle in Beihai, Beihai was destined to be at a huge disadvantage. Throughout the night, the biggest surprise was the moment when the weapons in Mount Dibing were blocked. Wang Xiaoyao didn't expect that Wu Qingwu would betray Mount Dibing. No one could expect it. When the weapons in Mount Dibing couldn't be used, they lost their biggest trump card. Mount Dibing, which had no high-end combat power, was a toothless tiger. When all kinds of weapons were blocked, it became a sick cat in an instant. Wang Xingxiao put his hope on the weapon system in Mount Dibing and Li Tianlan's own powerful combat power. Now that the former trump card had lost its effect, it meant that Li Tianlan had to bear more pressure. This was the first variable. Wang Xiaoyao's hidden strength was the second variable. The destructive power of a peak of the invincible realm expert couldn't be described too much, especially when they lost the advantage of firepower. Their top combat power was at an absolute disadvantage, and almost all the pressure was on Li Tianlan. He was not afraid of Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, or Wang Xiaoyao. He was not afraid of anyone. But when everyone stood on the opposite side of him, so what? Li Tianlan suddenly raised his palm. The sword formation of the 13-story building, which had been rotating around him, suddenly became clear. All eyes were focused on him at the same time, including Wang Xiaoyao's will. Everyone could regard Wuxia Xianxia as the key to breaking the situation, but now the main reason for the deadlock was Li Tianlan. Nothing was more important than Li Tianlan's every move now. If I leave Mount Dibing now, what do you think will happen? Li Tianlan looked at the sword formation rotating around him and suddenly asked. Wang Xiaoyao was stunned. He said calmly, Beihai will lose in the final battle, East Island will take half of Beihai, I will die here, second uncle will become the new patriarch, and Wuxia Xianxia will also die. Emperor Dong's palace will turn against the Dark Knights, and there will be a deadly feud between them and the joint forces. Your power in East Island may be withdrawn, but without the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will lose a natural barrier, and the whole Dark World will be your enemy. At the same time, you will be pressured by Zhongzhou state. Zhongzhou state will also find that they have other choices besides Emperor Dong's palace, such as Jiang Shangyu, who is relatively easier to control, and second uncle. It sounds really miserable. Li Tianlan smiled. Let's not talk about this. Wang Xingxiao looked at Li Tianlan. Now that you are standing here, do you think Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu are really willing to let you go with such a good opportunity? The Emperor Dong's palace is in a good situation now. The flourishing age fund's participation has made the Emperor Dong's palace a superforce. If you die here, not only will they lose a fatal threat in the future, but they will also be able to carve up the huge profits in the Emperor Dong's palace. With you here, who would be willing to let you leave? I can't leave. Li Tianlan said calmly, it's not that I can't leave. You don't seem to be optimistic about the result of the final battle. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes and said slowly. To be exact, it's my distrust of you. I know what you are waiting for, and you know what I am worried about. This is your Mount Dibbing, and I can do my best. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and continued, where is Wuyo? Wang Xingxiao suddenly fell silent. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the sword formation rotating around him without saying a word. He is not in Mount Dibbing now. At this point, I don't need to lie to you. If you lose this final battle, you will be miserable, but Beihai will be more miserable. If he is here, I can't hide to deal with you. Compared with you, these people in front of you are the real enemies that can't coexist. Where is Wuyo? Li Tianlan asked again. I only know that he is in Beihai. Wang Xingxiao said calmly. Uncle Lin told me that Wuyo can't leave Mount Dibbing and Worry-Free Villa. Li Tianlan frowned. I don't know about Wuyo, but he can leave temporarily. Because of some special circumstances, he has to leave. Wang Xingxiao looked at the sword formation around Li Tianlan and said calmly, because of you, or Wuqing, he feels threatened. So? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. So before Wuqing's energy is reduced to a certain level, I don't know where he is. Wang Xingxiao said. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked at Wang Xingxiao quietly. Wang Xingxiao was also looking at him. There was no avoidance in his eyes at all. Li Tianlan didn't know whether what he said was true or not. But the current situation was really not optimistic. Li Tianlan had to do something. The 13th floor became clearer and clearer around him. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time before he nodded. In that case, he pointed his finger gently. The infinite sword light drowned the Tianguang sword in an instant. The shining sword light lit up on Mount Dibbing, where the wind and snow were flying. In the endless light and shadow, Li Tianlan's voice was calm and indifferent. Then let's do as it wishes, and as you wish. Wuqing's energy was slowly but steadily decreasing. Another Li Tianlan appeared on Mount Dibbing. It was the Li Tianlan who was materialized by the Tianguang sword carrying Li Tianlan's sword intent. The two identical figures seemed to look at each other for a moment. Tianguang turned around and rushed to Jinghong in the war. It was at this moment. East Island, Ninghu. Xing Tian's huge and thick fingers loosened the bowstring that was as dark as night. At the same time, Li Tianlan looked up. It rained in East Island and snowed in Beihai. The night was still dark. Li Tianlan looked up at the night sky. Without his control, the sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly started to spin wildly. Crack. Crack, countless famous swords around Li Tianlan's body instantly combined into Wuqing. Wuqing turned into a black cloak and draped over Li Tianlan. The cloak fluttered unscrupulously in the cold wind and snow. Countless complex and mysterious golden lines flashed with a faint golden light at the same time. The cloak took Li Tianlan's figure to the sky quickly, getting higher and higher. In a flash, he had become a small black dot. Li Tianlan did not react at all from beginning to end. He just raised his head and looked at the pitch-black sky. The night was dead silent. There were no stars or clouds. There was only wind and snow. Li Tianlan's eyes were solemn and blank. he was now the strongest swordsman standing at the peak of the dark world. In the field of sword, when Wang Tianzong did not show up, he was the strongest. But at this moment, he stood high in the sky and looked at the night sky above with a blank face. Vaguely, he seemed to have sensed an incredibly subtle yet absolutely vast aura. That feeling, it seemed, could be, maybe, probably, it was a streak of sword energy. This volume is about to end. After it ends, there should be a separate chapter to talk about why this volume is so stupid. Well, about this fat man and Xing Tian. Chapter 10:16. Li Tianlan was rising, and Tianguang's sword was falling. Except for Li Tianlan and Wu Qing, it seemed that no one or anything could feel that incomparably faint aura. It was far away. That aura was so indifferent, as if separated by an unimaginable distance. It appeared and disappeared in a flash. With Li Tianlan's current strength, he was not even sure if it was a sword energy. Li Tianlan, condensed by Tianguang's sword, had rushed into the battle of Mount Dibing at the moment when his real body rose. The surging power from all directions tore the surrounding space wildly. Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurumi's figures were intertwined. The light of the sword and the saber reflected each other, and the sharp killing intent immediately shrouded Tianguang's sword. Everything on the battlefield seemed to be very normal. Just when Wang Xiaoyao was attracted by Li Tianlan, Mochizuki Song, who gradually fell into a passive position, suddenly broke out with all her strength. She did have the strength of the peak of the invincible realm now. But it was undeniable that because of her injury, she was no longer a match for Wang Xiaoyao. She didn't want to be a burden, let alone a bargaining chip in Wang Xiaoyao's hand. She had to seize all the opportunities that she could or could only seize. The cicada's cry trembled violently, and the sword light that was about to be suppressed by the saber light completely lit up. Mochizuki Song, who only had one arm left, strode forward and directly rushed to Wang Xiaoyao. The ninth blade's dusk. The solid sword energy tore the surrounding saber light, and Mochizuki Song's figure became more determined than ever. The cicada sword kept buzzing. The moment the saber light was suppressed for a short time, Mochizuki Song's sword intent suddenly changed. The 11th blade alluring. Alluring a city with one sword. All the saber light between heaven and earth shrank in an instant and condensed on the tip of the cicada's sword. Mochizuki Sword Song seemed to be driven by the cicada's sword. Like a phantom, he appeared beside Wang Xiaoyao in an instant. Clang! Wang Xiaoyao suddenly came to his senses and subconsciously raised the blade in his hand. The tip of the sword, which was shining with a cicada's cry, collided with the huge blade. Mochizuki Song's palm turned slightly, and the long sword with infinite sword energy stabbed forward for a moment, directly cutting a deep wound on Wang Xiaoyao's face. Not far away, Mount Dibing was completely boiling. Wang Xiaoyao's pupils contracted, and his essence, qi, and spirit were completely condensed. Very annoying. Wang Xiaoyao suddenly said, "You are very annoying, so I can only send you to hell first." None. The dark night suddenly shook. A clear shattering sound rang out without warning. Wang Xiaoyao, whose body was tense, waved the blade without any hesitation. Everything around him was shattering. That was a true shattering. The huge blade drew a flawless circle in the night, and the space within 100 meters turned into nothingness in the blink of an eye. The snow and wind evaporated. The night sky was completely shattered. Absolute darkness and silence enveloped Mochizuki Song in an instant. Wang Xiaoyao's body directly retreated a distance of hundreds of meters under the drive of this knife, just standing on the edge of the broken space. His entire body was glowing, and the saber radiance condensed from the immense power became unprecedentedly dazzling. Behind the horizon was the bright moon. Without any hesitation, Wang Xiaoyao stood at the edge of the shattered space and abruptly threw Jianghu out. In the pure darkness, the constantly blossoming saber light suddenly turned into an incomparably pure golden color. Countless golden rays of light refracted in the silent and broken domain. The huge blade of Jianghu flew out of his hand. Every time the blade rotated in the air, it brought a large piece of golden saber radiance. The refracted saber radiance turned into wisps of light, which twisted and turned into pieces of saber shadows. Densely packed. Almost in the blink of an eye, countless golden rays turned into thousands of saber blades. The saber blades rotated and rushed to Mochizuki Song one by one. At the moment when Mochizuki Song, whose body was in the shattered space, stabilized, the saber shadows all over the sky had already arrived in front of her. Mochizuki Song's figure began to rotate rapidly. The eighth blade, burning sky. The sword energy was like fire. A halo of sword energy of nearly 20 meters suddenly appeared around Mochizuki Song. Her body rotated faster and faster, and the scope of the halo of sword energy became larger and larger. The dense sword energy intertwined layer by layer. The huge halo collided with the golden saber shadows all over the sky. The halo spread. The countless saber shadows turned solid the moment they came into contact with the halo. A large number of saber shadows were swept away. Wang Xiaoyao stood there, motionless. His body became the center of the saber shadows all over the sky. The saber shadows that were swept away spun back to him, and then rushed to the halo again. The golden saber radiance lit up the whole night sky. Wang Xiaoyao's figure stood in the center of the golden light, incomparably gorgeous and majestic. The halo around Mochizuki Song was getting larger and larger. And the golden saber shadows were getting more and more fast. The vast and endless golden saber seemed to cover the whole night sky, constantly wearing down the sword energy around Mochizuki Song. The scope of the sword energy was getting larger and larger, but the degree of condensation of the sword energy was constantly decreasing. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm with no expression. The huge Jianghu whistled back to his hand. Wang Xiaoyao held the blade, and he didn't want to waste any time. He suddenly swung his palm. The golden saber shadows that covered the whole world became completely frenzied. The saber lights all over the sky rushed to Mochizuki Song like crazy. They were swept away, and then they rushed back at a faster speed. Mochizuki Song's rotating figure became more and more strenuous, and the halo of sword energy around her began to dim. He lost. The result was obvious. She cheated her body so that she temporarily had the power of the peak of the invincible realm. She didn't want to be a burden. But even so, she still lost. Mochizuki Song's aura began to decline. The golden saber lights all over the sky in front of her were like a torrent, vast and mighty, occupying all her vision. Mochizuki Song, who had been calm, took a deep breath. Her voice suddenly sounded in the light of the entanglement of the saber and the sword. "I can lose," she said blandly, but her body stopped spinning. The halo of sword energy around her began to be squeezed by countless saber shadows in an instant. The halo became smaller and thinner. Mochizuki Song looked as usual. She held Cicada Cry with her remaining arm and put it upright in front of her. She raised the sword to her eyebrows. Mochizuki Song's aura suddenly became very calm. It was like the calm before the storm. Her voice slowly sounded, "You can't win either." The boundless golden saber shadows completely drowned her. Mochizuki Song closed her eyes. Her expression became soft and serene, with a little nostalgia. The scenes of the past kept flashing in her mind. Her aura suddenly began to change. It was as if Wang Yuxian Song had suddenly become another person. 24 moves of sword 15th blade Samsara. Chapter 10:17. As the only inheritance of the Li family swordsmanship, in the Dark World, the 24 moves of sword had always been regarded as the top unique skill of swordsmanship in the Dark World, keeping pace with the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. In the past hundreds of years, because of the Li family's responsibilities, generation after generation of war gods of the Li family stood on the cusp of the Dark World. Compared with the calm and invincible Wang family of Beihai, the Li family was more powerful. Therefore, the 24 moves of sword was even more famous than the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation. The Dark World was so familiar with the 24 moves of sword. After so many years, almost anyone with a little bit of knowledge could recognize the 24 moves of sword and the 24 unique skills. A few of them had even been lost to the outside world and supported many large-scale forces. However, in the hundreds of years since the Lin clan came to the Li family, very few people could really appreciate the 24 moves of sword. The map of God of War represented the Li family's martial arts for hundreds of years. They were the Balance Manual, the Peak Manual, and the Invincible Manual. The first two were relatively stable, while the latter was almost a new transformation of the Balance Manual and the Peak Manual. Li Honghe practiced the Balance Manual. Even someone as arrogant as Li Guangtu had only practiced the Pinnacle Scripture at the beginning. His Longevity Seal and Immortal Seal still had a lot of traces of the Pinnacle Scripture. After breaking and building, although he had also come into contact with the Invincible Scripture, the Pinnacle Scripture was his foundation. The Li family had 9 generations of war gods. Including Li Tianlan, it was the 10th generation. Among the 10 generations, only Li Tianlan practiced the Invincible Manual. He destroyed his body in the most extreme way, infinitely overdrew his body's potential, and took the fastest way to ensure the strongest strength. Whether it was Dongqing Huangtu in the memory or Li Tianlan now, their paths had not changed. At the most difficult time, they both chose the Invincible Manual. So for now, in the past hundreds of years, excluding the ancestors of the Lin clan, only Li Tianlan could really let people see the full appearance of the 24 moves of sword, and only he could let people see the strongest state of the 24 moves of sword. Dongqing Huangtu gave the Invincible Manual to Gu Xianyan, and Gu Xianyan taught the Invincible Manual to Flaming Fire in this era. Both of them had some martial arts foundation, so the Invincible Manual they practiced was undoubtedly not very pure. But with the foundation of the Invincible Manual, even if it was not pure, their 24 moves of sword was still the 24 moves of sword of Invincible Manual. What was the most powerful 24 moves of sword? It was to use the most special move in the 24 moves of swordsmanship to exert the most abundant and perfect sword energy. The 24 moves of sword were not perfect. For example, the Broken Reincarnation, which was claimed to specially restrain the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Eternal Shattering, who possessed sword intent but was unable to completely control sword qi. For example, the extremely sharp sword qi but insufficient sword intent, the Skybreaker. 3 of the 4 absolute swords of the Li clan's 24 moves of sword were incomplete. Only one move, be it the sword qi or the sword intent, could be said to be perfect and flawless. It was the true ultimate sword. 21st Blade, Shatter of Land. This was the only move of the 4 supreme swords that was completely perfect. It was also the ultimate sword that could only be unleashed by practicing the Invincible Manual. The 15th Blade, Samsara, was the most special move in the 24 moves of sword. In the 24 moves of sword, the other 23 moves were mainly for killing. Their sword intent and sword qi could be ever-changing, but their core concept remained the same. They were all focused on killing. Only the 15th Blade had the core idea of borrowing, or a kind of replication in martial arts. This was the most demanding move in the 24 moves of sword. It required the perfect integration of sword energy and willpower to replicate a move that could not be exerted in one's extreme state. It was beyond the peak. One sword reincarnation, extreme sublimation. In Li Tianlan's understanding, it was to use this move to reincarnate an extremely illusory dreamland, temporarily turning everything including oneself into nothingness. In the short moment of reincarnation, the person who chose to be reincarnated was the only real one. The moment the reincarnation sword was drawn, the most real sword energy appeared from the most nothingness. This was also an important basis for supporting Li Tianlan's flawless swordsmanship. After reincarnation, Shatter of Land. This was the strongest 24 moves of sword at present. Mochizuki Song and Li Tianlan did not have much contact, and she did not need to reincarnate Li Tianlan's sword intent. So when the golden saber shadows completely submerged her body, Mochizuki Song's figure suddenly turned into nothingness. An extremely quiet and deadly aura suddenly surged out from the golden saber shadows all over the sky. It was like a dream, real and fake. Flaming Fire's figure disappeared. But the constantly fluctuating aura became stronger and stronger. In a flash, it had become a hidden sword energy. The space was broken and reorganized. A figure appeared in everyone's sight. In the golden light and shadows all over the sky, the bloated figure, which seemed real and illusory, stood quietly, dressed in black and motionless. No one could see her face. Countless golden saber shadows spun wildly around her body and chopped. She was so quiet, from the inside to the outside, there was nothing but silence. Wang Xiaoyao's heart suddenly sank. He did not know the specific reason, but a very violent and obvious uneasiness suddenly rose from his heart. Turning the blade of Millennium Blade, Wang Xiaoyao did not hesitate to open his hands. Thousands of dense golden saber shadows began to retreat at the same time. Countless saber shadows were neatly arranged, turning into a dazzling light curtain. The light curtain gathered toward Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xiaoyao's hands were put together. He held Millennium Blade in his hand. A purer golden light burst out from the blade of Millennium Blade and continued to extend in the night. In an instant, a huge and heavy golden saber shadow began to take shape in his hand. The golden saber shadows all over the sky kept flying and gathered in his hand. The shadow of the golden giant saber in his hand expanded wildly, and in the blink of an eye, it had expanded to hundreds of meters. Straightforward, decisive, and ruthless. Wang Xiaoyao raised his palm, and the golden giant saber, which was hundreds of meters long, slashed at Mochizuki and Song without any reservation. At this moment, Wang Xiaoyao really did his best, without any reservation. His strongest martial arts was the saber, and his strongest unique skill was also the saber. Tianyef Bright Moon. These two unique skills could be said to be the essence of his life's research. After successfully entering the peak of the invincible realm half a year ago, Wang Xiaoyao thought about it day and night, and finally combined these two unique skills and became his strongest trump card. Wang Xiaoyao named this move Saber. Pure Saber. Xiaochen pushed his strength to the limit. Every strand of saber light was the peak of his strength in his life. In an instant, the whole night seemed to be receding. The golden saber shadow, which was hundreds of meters long, occupied everything and became the most dazzling color in the two battlefields on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. Blood gushed out of Wang Xiaoyao's mouth. His face suddenly became as pale as a sheet of paper as he swung his saber. A large amount of blood gushed out of almost all parts of his body, and it looked extremely tragic. This was almost a move beyond his control. This was the price of extreme overdraft of his body. Before the saber light hurt anyone, his internal organs had been seriously injured by the power he exerted. The golden saber, which was hundreds of meters long, shone in the air and chopped down. The chaotic night sky was split into two halves visible to the naked eye. In the boundless silence and chaos, Mochizuki and Song raised her head. Her eyes were numb and gray. She was indeed no match for Wang Xiaoyao. Judging from Wang Xiaoyao's real strength, Mochizuki and Song believed that even if she really broke through to the peak of the invincible realm, her chance of winning against him was less than 40%. At the age of 38, he was at the peak of the invincible realm. Wang Xiaoyao's talent was indeed not much worse than Wang Tianzong's. She couldn't block that move of the bright moon, nor could she block the current move of the saber. If she couldn't block it, she couldn't block it. There was nothing to hide from the truth. But what could she do? She couldn't block this move. Wang Xiaoyao would certainly not be able to block her next move. She could also let that damn man see that more than 2 years ago, there was also a person in Mormons. Just like her today, he opened up the prosperous dynasty that belonged to him with one sword move. Mochizuki and Song closed their eyes. The sword energy became more and more illusory. In a trance, in everyone's sight, the bloated figure in the black cloak began to fall from the sky without warning. The blade was on the ground. Her body continued to fall, and her speed became faster and faster. The surging sword chi followed her as she fell, drawing a clear mark in the night. The saber light suppressed the clear sword intent and chopped straight down. Under the night, the figure of flaming fire seemed to have completely become another person in everyone's sight. Master of Samsara Palace. Yagyu Kurasumi suddenly shouted. The moment he spoke, there was a pause in the battle of Mount Dibbing, whether it was graceful bird or heavenly light. Li Tianlan stood high in the sky. The incomparably vast sword energy had disappeared. He lowered his head and looked at the falling figure. His eyes were a little dazed. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace suddenly became real in the process of falling. She held Cicada Cry's left hand and raised it. Above the sky, there was a lot of colors. Night, flying snow, golden saber. A colorful light suddenly appeared on the brightly colored battlefield. Every ray of light was extremely clear and dazzling. The light was like a sword, rushing to the falling golden saber in the air. Mochizuki and Song closed her eyes, and her expression was extremely calm. The extremely powerful aura continued to rise in her body like the last radiance of the setting sun. Once again, it surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and rose all the way. One sword of samsara, extreme sublimation. Before anyone could react, the aura of Mochizuki and Song suddenly approached the peak of the invincible realm. After samsara, it was the shattering of land. Mochizuki and Song were not familiar with Li Tianlan, but she had been with Qin Weibai for many years. So in this sword move, she reincarnated the state of the Master of Samsara Palace. The strongest state of the Master of Samsara Palace. In most people's minds, everyone knew when the Master of Samsara Palace, who had died in Mormons more than 2 years ago, was at her strongest. That was before she died. The light of the eternal sword was too dazzling. So at this time in the dark world, except for Wang Tianzong, probably no one knew that the power that the Master of Samsara Palace used to control Ruthless and let him break out with all his strength was the shattering of land after samsara. The 15th blade, Samsara. At this moment, the Master of Samsara Palace more than 2 years ago was the only choice of Mochizuki and Song. She could not completely copy the original eternal sword. She was not strong enough, and neither was her weapon. She could copy it. It was just the starting move of the eternal sword. But it was enough to deal with Wang Xiaoyao. Mochizuki and Song held Cicada Cry tightly in her hand. The sword energy was still surging and slowly changing. The golden saber that kept chopping down in the air became more and more violent. The golden saber light smashed wisps of 5-colored sword energy one after another. Wang Xiaoyao's eyes were completely red. High in the sky, Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly. His heartbeat began to quicken, and his body gradually tightened. As if feeling his will, the cloak that Ruthless turned into a sword formation again. More than a dozen divine weapons slowly rotated around him. In the other direction of Mount Dibbing, the space in the air was slightly distorted. Silently, Jianghu walked out of the distorted space and looked at the direction of Wang Xiaoyao seriously and solemnly. As an expert who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this saber and sword meant. Wang Xiaoyao broke out with all his strength. At this time, Mochizuki and Song almost ignored life and death. Mochizuki and Song could not block this saber. Wang Xiaoyao also couldn't block this sword. If the light of the saber and sword completely attacked each other, then this would be a fierce battle with no winner. Wang Xiaoyao might be stronger than Mochizuki and Song. But everything was meaningless. This was destined to end in mutual destruction. The sword energy and the saber light rubbed wildly in the air. On the battlefield of Mochizuki and Wang Xiaoyao, the area within 1,000 meters was completely covered by all kinds of light. Jianghu narrowed his eyes. His body stretched out little by little, and his eyes became extremely dignified. He had no friendship with Wang Xiaoyao. The two sides were just cooperating. From the beginning to the end, they were temporarily driven by interests. Yes, temporarily. Both sides knew very well what was going on, and they also knew the direction of their relationship after this cooperation. If they won the final battle of Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao would become the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Qinglei of Zhongzhou State would also clear all the obstacles before the election and completely establish his position as the crown prince. Wang Xiaoyao and the allied forces were also destined to go their separate ways. East Island would be busy absorbing the territory in the south of Beihai. Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace would also become antagonistic again after there was no outside pressure. Even if they wouldn't fight to the death, because of the distribution of interests, there were bound to be countless frictions. The dark world inside East Island would definitely be constantly turbulent, and there was no possibility of it calming down in the near future. And more aid would also return to the European continent, completely cutting off the relationship between Knights Templars and the Holy Land, and helping Daoist stabilize its position and compete for the dominance of the Dark World in the European continent. Shadow Throne, Dark Knights, the Holy Land, Rothschild. Wild, it would also be very lively. As for Jiang Shangyu, as a deal with the Jiang family of South America, he would also go to America with Jiang Guochu to help the Jiang family of South America stabilize the throne of the Dark World in America. If the Lin clan had different opinions in the process, Jiang Shangyu would have to fight with Lin Fengting. And the Purgatory of Heaven capital would be busy devouring everything left by Emperor Dong's palace. Li Guangtu was not a good person. On the contrary, he was an extremely overbearing and paranoid person. After devouring Emperor Dong's palace, he would definitely want to take East Island back. At that time, it would also cause frictions. As for Wang Xiaoyao, after he became the Patriarch of Beihai, he wouldn't do anything to the Allied forces in the short term. But it didn't mean that he would never do anything to the Allied forces. It would take 2 or 3 years to rectify the internal affairs of Beihai and regain its footing. When Li Huaqing completely retired and Wang Qinglei became the president of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai would probably be the first to deal with the Allied forces. He wanted to destroy Jiang Shangyu and take back everything that Beihai had lost today. For hundreds of years, Beihai had never been in the habit of being a dog. Naturally, Wang Xiaoyao wouldn't either. If Wang Xiaoyao was lucky enough, with his martial arts talent, he could even break through the limit of the peak of the invincible realm in 5 or 6 years and become the so-called half-step heavenly son beyond the peak of the invincible realm. At that time, even if Wang Tianzong didn't come out, Beihai would make up for the last shortcoming of the cutting-edge combat capability. With the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai and Wang Qinglei's status in the future, the Wang family of Beihai would still be a superclass superpower in the Dark World, at least much more difficult to deal with than it was now. In this way, the situation after winning the final battle was already very obvious. Wang Xiaoyao was destined to part ways with them and go against them. Even the Purgatory of Heaven capital might also become enemies after this cooperation. The 3 parties might be able to live in peace in the short term, because each had its own problems that had to be dealt with. But when these problems were almost dealt with, the dynasty that Jiang Shangyu yearned for might not be able to take shape. Even if it took shape, he would have to face new challenges from Wang Xiaoyao and the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu liked to see the fighting style of Mungeizer Xuanga and Wang Xiaoyao perishing together. He would not save Wang Xiaoyao, and it was impossible for him to do so. If Wang Xiaoyao died here, it would be a happy ending for everyone. It was not their fault. It was Wang Xiaoyao's fault. This situation was undoubtedly the best. But, Jiang Shangyu subconsciously raised his head and glanced at the sky. Li Tianlan's figure flew so high that it had merged with the night. Even Jiang Shangyu did not see Li Tianlan's figure. No one cared about Wang Xiaoyao's life or death. What about Mungeizer Xuanga's life or death? If Li Tianlan made a move, seriously injured Li Tianlan, killed Wang Xiaoyao, killed Mungeizer Xuanga, and killed Wang Xingxiao, would the final battle in Beihai come to an end? Jiang Shangyu believed that Li Tianlan could also see this possibility. But there were many things that could not be avoided just because they could see the ending. He did not save Wang Xiaoyao, but he was ready to make a move with all his strength when Li Tianlan saved Mungeizer Xuanga. The only pity was that he still did not know where Li Guangtu was. The only thing he could be sure of was that Li Guangtu should be nearby now. He had no choice. When Jiang Shangyu made a move, he would definitely cooperate fully. Xianxia thought silently. A domain had begun to bloom in his palm and was constantly condensing. Li Guangtu was indeed nearby. He did not approach the battlefield of Wang Xiaoyao and Mungazer Xuanga, nor did he go to Mount Dibbing. Instead, he chose to stand under a dense tree in the middle of the battlefield. The wind and snow covered the sky and the earth. He stood quietly, and his body was covered with wind and snow. All his aura was completely restrained. Standing quietly under the tree and observing the situation of Mount Dibbing and Wang Xiaoyao, he looked like a snowman. He had been standing here for 2 days. A few hours before the final battle, an elite of the Beihai Internal Security Force patrolling nearby passed by him and even stuck a branch on his head, which was covered with wind and snow. The branch was still stuck on his head, which looked a little funny. In a state of extreme concealment, he raised his head and silently looked at the golden saber light and the colorful sword energy in the air. His eyes narrowed little by little. Subtle sword energy surged out of his body little by little, quietly filling every grain of wind and snow on his body. Wang Xiaoyao was the most surprising person tonight. He was also the biggest surprise of the joint forces. When the outcome of the battle between him and Mungazer Xuanga was so important that it could directly affect the outcome of the final battle in Beihai and even Li Tianlan's life and death, no one could deny Wang Xiaoyao's contribution in this final battle. Li Guangtu raised his head and quietly looked at Wang Xiaoyao in the air. He calculated the angle and the distance, silently waiting for the opportunity to make a move. Compared with Jiang Shangyu's hesitation, he was very sure that Li Tianlan would definitely make a move. At that time, the whole battlefield might have some unexpected changes. Through the wind and snow, Li Guangtu's eyes were lonely and indifferent. The main purpose of his coming to Beihai this time was to kill Li Tianlan and get the resources of Emperor Dong's palace. As for allies, Chen Fangqing was an ally. Besides that, he didn't think he had any allies. He teamed up with Jiang Shanyu to get rid of Li Tianlan, that was all. If there was a chance, Wang Xiaoyao, Jiang Shanyu, and everyone else. If he could kill them, Li Guangtu naturally didn't want to let them go. In the silent wind and snow, he took a gentle step forward and looked at the sky more and more attentively. The colorful light rose against the sky. The golden saber light kept condensing and shining, chopping down crazily. Mungazer Xuanga's body accelerated. 100 meters, 50 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters, 5 meters. Boom! The sword light flew, and Mungazer Xuanga's slender body finally fell to the ground. The moment his feet touched the ground, Mungazer Xuanga suddenly opened her eyes. Her figure disappeared. The bloated figure in a black robe in everyone's sight also disappeared. Only the sword light was still flying. The meteor rose from the ground in an instant. With a loud bang, the colorful sword energy all over the sky gathered into a bunch. The sharp edge shattered the golden saber light in an instant and appeared in front of Wang Xiaoyao. At this moment, the edge of the sword could no longer be described as swift. It almost ignored the distance. Wang Xiaoyao, whose eyes were scarlet, seemed to be completely stimulated. His body didn't dodge. Facing the sword light piercing his heart, he raised Jianghu in his hand and chopped directly at Mungazer Xuanga's head. They perished together. Puff! With a dull sound, the cicada's blade directly pierced Wang Xiaoyao's heart. There was no blood. Countless sword energy frantically flowed back and was directly pressed back into Mungazer Xuanga's body by an irresistible force. The blade of Jianghu froze above Mungazer Xuanga's head. Li Tianlan's figure directly appeared between the two. He reached out and directly pulled Mungazer Xuanga to his side. It was too late to do anything. In an instant, the majestic sword energy and the extremely condensed domain directly broke out from Li Tianlan's side. 30-meter mortal world. For the first time, the most powerful defensive unique skill of the Jiang family of South America left its master. The moment Li Tianlan appeared, Jiang Shangyu's body directly turned into a phantom, 100 meters away, and almost directly narrowed the distance between him and Li Tianlan in half a second. He opened his palm, and the domain that had been brewing for a long time completely enveloped Li Tianlan's body. The extremely condensed domain was compressed crazily, directly imprisoning Li Tianlan's body within a range of more than 10 meters. As the 30-meter mortal world formed around Li Tianlan, a sword light so powerful that it almost shattered heaven and earth suddenly lit up from the ground. The moment Li Tianlan's eyes saw the light, Li Guangtu, who had been hiding silently on the ground, had directly appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The 24 moves of sword break of the sky. Everyone was waiting for this moment. The battle on Mount Dibing completely stopped. The 30-meter mortal world created by Jianghu instantly turned into absolute darkness. In the darkness, all the attacks that completely existed in Jianghu's imagination were concretized, pulling Li Tianlan's body crazily and affecting his balance. The black domain outside the 30-meter mortal world began to collapse inward, and the outer domain space became extremely soft. Jianghu's eyes were calm and indifferent. For today's opportunity, he had waited for decades. He had absolute confidence in his domain. Dongsheng Huangtu might ignore everything in his heyday. But now Li Tianlan couldn't break his 30-meter mortal world in a short time. Outside of his domain, he could make his domain undergo different changes. Li Tianlan couldn't break his domain. This also meant that neither Li Guangtu nor anyone else could break his domain. Jianghu himself couldn't even cancel the domain in a short time. But being unable to cancel it didn't mean that it couldn't be changed. The edge of the domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly turbulent. The deep darkness, like waves of water, became soft, deep, and irregular. Jianghu attacked crazily. He was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. The mighty power in his hands turned into translucent airwaves one after another. On Mount Dibing, Tianhai Wuji suddenly turned around and unsheathed his long saber. His body jumped up like a meteor, and a waterfall-like saber light burst out from his hands in an instant. It was endless. Hundreds and thousands of saber lights gathered together and poured down in Tianhai Wuji's hands. All the light rushed in the direction of Li Tianlan. Jianghu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji attacked almost at the same time. Above the night sky, Jifeng raining sword. Mount Dibing was completely illuminated by the sword light in an instant. Gale, flying snow, raging fire, thunder, and endless light and shadow burst out in Jianghu Kurumi's hands and turned into fierce and violent sword energy. The sword energy and the saber light converged and merged perfectly, and then turned into pure power. Li Guangtu appeared at the edge of the domain. The sword light that broke the sky was condensed into a small beam by him. The sword in his hand directly pierced into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Jiang Guochu also attacked with all his strength. His domain and Jianghu's domain merged perfectly. Or it could be said that Jianghu's domain swallowed Jiang Guochu's domain, so that the edge of the 30-meter mortal world, which temporarily trapped Li Tianlan and Wuxia Xianxia, became softer. Countless blazing white lights like holy light burst out in an instant. Moraid's figure was like a mad bull. He roared and rushed forward, waving his fists. White fist shadows were connected into one, and they completely hid into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. He was originally an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. After being crowned by the Pope, he was even closer to the peak of the invincible realm. He could even be regarded as the weakest expert at the peak of the invincible realm. At this time, when he broke out with all his strength, he was even more terrifying than Jianghu Kurumi and Tianhai Wuji. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm on Mount Dibing were also desperately attacking at the same time. The power of nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm gathered together, which was almost far beyond the full outbreak of an ordinary expert of the invincible realm. Countless lights and shadows completely covered the battlefield where Wuxia Xianxia and Wang Xiaoyao fought. It was dazzling. For a moment, no one could see what was happening around Li Tianlan. Except for Wang Xiaoyao, all the experts of the invincible realm were desperately attacking. The 30-meter mortal world that trapped Li Tianlan was extremely strong. At this time, the constantly fluctuating edge of the domain seemed to have become a container that absorbed everyone's power at this moment. Li Kuangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jiang Guochu, and Moraid. 2 of them were beyond the peak of the invincible realm. 1 was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. 3 were invincible realm experts. Nearly 20 top experts of the half-step invincible realm. Without any hesitation or reservation, this was almost all the high-end combat capability of the Dark World. Everyone seized this opportunity, but at the same time, they poured their strongest power on Li Tianlan. People in the world attacked Beihai together. At this moment, it became people in the world killing Li Tianlan together. The incomparably strong 30-meter mortal world carried everyone's power and was almost completely deformed. The domain let out a cracking sound. Everyone knew that the moment the domain broke, Li Tianlan was besieged by everyone present at the same time. Chosen One? Donghuang? What could they do? Everyone looked at Li Tianlan coldly. Li Tianlan's figure was completely submerged in the black 30-meter mortal world, blurred. Suddenly, there was a light in the deep and obscure darkness. In the domain, Mochizuki Song, whose consciousness had become a little dizzy, managed to take off the black bracelet in her hand. She didn't give it to Li Tianlan. Instead, she directly threw the bracelet into the 13-story building surrounding the 2 of them. The sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly stopped for a moment. The black bracelet turned into a black sniper rifle. It was not in the form of a sword. But in this state, the Dark Saint's spear directly found its own orbit and position in the sword formation of the 13-story building. The spear and the sword rotated around Li Tianlan at the same time. The domain twisted wildly, faster and faster. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and a little cruel. He slowly stretched out his palm. Crack! The rotating sword formation of the 13-story building suddenly emitted endless dazzling light. This was not sword energy. It had nothing to do with the sword or the domain. It was like pure light. Or, it was pure energy. The sword formation of the 13-story building disappeared completely. The huge Xianyuan blade appeared in Li Tianlan's hand. At the moment when the domain was about to break, between heaven and earth, Li Tianlan's clear, indifferent, and infinitely majestic voice echoed in the night sky, 1 word at a time. Where I stand, Xianyuan blade was dazzling, and the colorful light kept flowing. It was pure light. It passed through the absolute darkness without any attack and directly penetrated the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. Li Tianlan's voice sounded with the shuttling of the light. Forbid the domain. Whoosh! The 30-meter mortal world, which was distorted to the extreme, began to rotate in the opposite direction in an instant. Before anyone could react, it became calm and weak. Only Li Tianlan's voice was still echoing, like a god. Where I stand, sword light is forbidden. There was no sound. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world was broken. In the domain, both the saber light and the sword energy disappeared in an instant. The colorful light was mighty and obliterated everything in the blink of an eye. The sword of Xianyuan blade was dimmed to the extreme. In the last afterglow of the light, Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. Forbid here. Forbid the domain, forbid the sword light. Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu's faces changed dramatically in an instant. Without any hesitation, the 2 of them rose directly into the sky. Li Tianlan's last forbid sounded. The 2 of them suddenly fell to the ground. The next second, Li Tianlan's figure directly rushed out of the dissipating domain. Mochizuki Song's body appeared beside Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao felt cold for a moment and subconsciously held her body. Li Tianlan disappeared. Tianguang's sword appeared beside Wang Xingxiao. Tianguang's sword light was completely dim, like a shadow. Shadow? No! An extremely angry roar suddenly sounded from Mount Dibing. Li Tianlan's figure directly changed places with Tianguang's sword in an instant. Puff! In the dull piercing sound, the huge blade of the indestructible Xianyuan blade directly cut open Tianhai Wuji's chest. Blood rained all over the sky. Tianhai Wuji, with a blank look in his eyes, subconsciously wanted to lower his head. But his line of sight suddenly flew up. The head of the first Grandmaster of East Island flew up into the sky with a lot of blood without warning. His chest was broken, his heart was broken, and his head flew up. The so-called Grandmaster, the so-called invincible realm. In an instant, it was like a blade of grass that was directly cut off. No. Ah. You. Yagyu Kurumi's sorrowful and indignant roar stopped abruptly. Xianyuan blade in Li Tianlan's hand disappeared in an instant. One after another, the divine weapons suddenly scattered around Mount Dibbing and turned into shadows one after another. Li Tianlan took a step out, instantly changed places with the shadow, and appeared in front of Yagyu Kurumi. Yagyu Kurumi opened his mouth, and his roar was directly suppressed. Great power was poured into his arms, and Li Tianlan suddenly exerted force. Yagyu Kurumi's upper body was pressed down. Knee strike. The knee strike of dual wind and thunder veins. Unimaginable power and speed. Extremely violent and extremely simple movement. Bang! In the dull sound, Yagyu Kurumi's upper body suddenly spat out a lot of blood. His chest was suddenly smashed under the violent impact, and a lot of blood rushed into his head. Under the great pressure, countless blood, like bullets or swords, directly pierced Yagyu Kurumi's skull. His whole head was like a watermelon smashed by a sledgehammer, and blood and brain matter suddenly burst out. Instant kill. The second instant kill. In the twinkling of an eye, the two Grandmasters of East Island had completely fallen, and they died without a whole body. Li Tianlan's figure flickered. More than a dozen shadows kept moving on Mount Dibbing, and the shadows covered the whole area. Wherever Li Tianlan and the shadows were, everything around was completely his domain. He could appear in any place where the shadows existed, and he could also disappear from any place where the shadows existed. He came and went unpredictably, regardless of the distance. One after another, the domains shrank crazily. Jianghu, who was in a violent state of mind, had a face full of horror. He and Moraid gathered together for the first time. The two of them stood side by side, and they desperately wanted to rush out of Mount Dibbing. Boom! The black shadow flickered instantly, and the mighty power tore Jianghu's domain from behind in an instant. At the same time, an extremely condensed domain once again enveloped Jianghu and Moraid. It was a close call. The great power pulled the two of them directly out of Li Tianlan's attack range. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu appeared in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Li Guangtu squinted, and there was deep fear in his eyes. But Jiang Shangyu's eyes were full of rage, and he almost lost his mind. Li Tianlan. He squeezed out a low roar from his throat, word by word. You have to die. You have to die. Think about how to survive yourself first. Li Tianlan said in a calm voice. The somewhat unfamiliar and strange chat stopped abruptly when Li Tianlan appeared in front of Mochizuki and Mochizuki. The helicopter hovered in the air. The rain outside the window was getting heavier and heavier. Xing Tian's huge body curled up in the cabin of the helicopter. He lowered his head and remained motionless. Saint and Xianyuan Wushang stared at the picture of Mount Dibbing on the screen at the same time, but their reactions were different. They saw Jiang Shangyu attack with all his strength, and they saw Li Guangtu break out with all his strength. They saw Moraid, Yagyu Kurumi, Tianhai Wuji, Jianghu, and more than a dozen top superiors of the half-step invincible realm working together without hesitation. The dark domain of the 30-meter mortal world was constantly twisting and rotating. Until the light in the domain lit up, and Li Tianlan's voice came out. Saint's solemn face slightly relaxed for a moment. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and laughed. It's the law of sword. Has it come to this step? The law of sword? Hearing the term that he had never heard of, Saint frowned. What's that? It's what you see now. This is the law of sword. In other words, it's probably the limit state of the heavenly sun. Big Brother originally needed to make further breakthroughs before he could use the law of sword. Of course, he also needed Wei. Well, and Wu Qing's cooperation. Now he has reached this step. Maybe Big Brother has just found something amazing, Wei. Tut, he shook his head with a headache. Wu Qing's state is also very important. Who the hell are you? Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang and asked slowly. He had been in the cabin for nearly 20 minutes, but Xianyuan Wushang's attitude toward him had been very strange. Some things he said were also inexplicable. For example, the so-called law of sword. Saint had never heard of this before. Now, I'm a doctor of Emperor Dong's palace. Xianyuan Wushang laughed. What about before? Saint asked without relaxing. Before, Xianyuan Wushang was in a trance and suddenly asked, if I tell you that there was no before, would you believe me? Here it comes again, Saint cursed in his heart. This kind of inexplicable conversation had been repeated many times. Hearing it again, he didn't even know what to say. I'm kidding. Xianyuan Wushang gave a hollow laugh. Before, you just treated me as a tourist. But if you don't mind, I'd like to be your brother. I have no more or less brothers, but I don't have brothers of unknown origin. Saint's voice was a little cold. Is origin really so important? Xianyuan Wushang said with a smile, what matters is what I've done and what I can do in the future. What can you do? Saint raised his eyebrows slightly. I'm a doctor. First of all, I can definitely save people. For example, the real sister-in-law. Well, you should know that I'm not talking about the one in Tiannan now, but the one in Europe. No, that's not right either. They are a little strange. Strictly speaking, they are not real or fake. They are all real. They are the same person. You. Saint's expression changed instantly. He suddenly stood up and grabbed Xianyuan Wushang's shoulder. Don't get excited. Take your time, take your time. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and pressed Saint's body back to the seat. Another example is that I now control the weapon control authority of the entire East Island. Do you know what that means? Now in Beihai, there is no enemy, not even a bullet. Everything I can control will be given to Emperor Dong's palace as a greeting gift. Tut, a brother like me is so generous. You don't even want to acknowledge it. What are you doing, buddy? Saint's brain suddenly became extremely chaotic. Xianyuan Wushang had already talked about greeting gifts before. But what happened to Qin Weibai shocked him greatly. Qin Weibai couldn't have told him these things, so how did he know? How much do you know about the boss? Saint shook his head hard, looked at Xianyuan Wushang seriously, and said in a deep voice. Not much at the moment. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. But I'll go to the European continent to talk to her after this. Since I can tell you, you can trust me. I can cure her. Of course, it takes time, or rather, the right time. Even if I want to wake her up now, I won't do it. It's a good thing for everyone that she's in this state for the time being. You? Talk to her? Saint looked at Xianyuan Wushang strangely. The boss is unconscious and in a bad state now. How are you going to talk to her? I have my ways. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head slightly and said nothing. Saint was silent for a while. Suddenly, he looked at Xing Tian, who was curled up in the corner of the cabin without saying a word. In this situation, Xing Tian was completely different from the fierce man who pulled the bow and shot Gravik to death outside the cabin. Now, his huge body was curled up, and he looked like a doormat. Saint shook his head slightly. What about him? His strength is limited, and so is mine. We can do things that a lot of people can't do, but some things are one-off. For example, he shot your so-called superior of the invincible realm to death, and I control the weapon system of East Island. These are all one-off things, and they'll be gone after they're used. At least in Emperor Dong's palace, I hope everyone can treat me as a pure doctor. As for him, I think it's reasonable to arrange him to be a PE teacher. He paused and continued to smile. Don't worry. I have no hostility toward Emperor Dong's palace. Everything I've done can prove it. He looked at Saint and said softly, maybe, you should look out of the window. Saint was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly realized that the fighting sound outside the cabin was getting smaller and smaller, almost disappearing. He was shocked, stood up subconsciously, and rushed to the cabin door. The headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School was at the foot of the mountain. But it was getting quieter and quieter. Saint stood in front of the cabin door, looking at everything below, and kept silent for a long time. In the headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School, everyone in the Nightmare Army also kept silent for a long time. Saint blinked and suddenly didn't know what to say. It was still raining outside the cabin. The raindrops fell on the ground. But the headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School had completely changed. The soldiers of the Nightmare Army were full of vigor, and there were few enemies who could fight back. Most importantly, as the rain fell, flowers were blooming on the land of Jianghu Sword Training School at a speed visible to the naked eye. The bright colors almost occupied the entire headquarters of Jianghu Sword Training School. The rain was dripping in the air. An unimaginably rich life force was brewing between the heavens and the earth. This, Saint turned his head in disbelief and looked at Xianyuan Wushang, who called himself a doctor. This is? Come and see. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan on the screen and said gently, it seems that something interesting is going to appear. Chapter 10:18. The body was broken, the head rolled down, and the blood splashed. Under the night sky, before the cold and majestic voice of prohibition fell, the bodies of the two grandmasters of the invincible realm in East Island had been separated. Life and death in an instant. Abruptness, astonishment, panic, and panic. Before anyone could react, Li Tianlan's figure flashed continuously. How long did it take? Half a second? Or, in a shorter time, Li Tianlan almost directly reversed the situation. At the cost of consuming most of ruthless energy, he exchanged the lives of two superiors of the invincible realm and saved flaming fire. All kinds of thoughts flashed in Li Tianlan's mind for a moment. The next second, Jiang Shangyu appeared in front of him. Jiang Shangyu's reaction speed was not slow. The energy of the final promotion of the 13th floor turned every divine weapon into a shadow, covering most of the battlefield. With the existence of the shadow, Li Tianlan could use the shadow formula to appear anywhere at will regardless of the distance. As long as Jiang Shangyu came half a second later, Jiang Guochu was doomed to die on the spot, not to mention the stronger Moraid. He escaped death. Jiang Guochu, with a pale face, stood in Jiang Shangyu's domain and breathed heavily. The violent panic was almost uncontrollable in his heart. He had seen death, and he had also seen the death of an invincible realm expert. The death of an invincible realm expert was not called death, but fall. This word was enough to explain the status of an invincible realm expert in the dark world. The death of any invincible realm expert was a big deal for the dark world. Jiang Guochu never thought that an invincible realm expert could be so fragile. In less than a second, two comrades whose strength was above his died instantly. In her sight, Li Tianlan was still at the moment when he killed Tianhai Wuji. Before the shadow disappeared, Li Tianlan had already killed Yagyu Kurasumi and appeared behind him. Fast. Unimaginably fast. The extreme speed turned into absolute power and killing intent at that moment. The so-called Kendo of East Island and the so-called domain of the Jiang family of South America were all like a joke at that moment. Jiang Guochu felt like an ant, a pale piece of paper, or a withered grass. Everything about him was so fragile in front of Li Tianlan. It seemed that if Li Tianlan touched him a little, his body would be like the two grandmasters in East Island. His flesh and blood would fly, and even his bones would disappear. He gasped. Out of instinct, he hid behind Jiang Shangyu. Death and eternal silence had just brushed past him at a very close distance. Everything about the Jiang family of South America had almost become history. Ups and downs, great surprise and great joy. Jianghu's whole body kept trembling, and his eyes became a little dull. You should think about how you're going to survive first. Li Tianlan's calm voice rang out. Jianghu's body trembled again when he heard it. Jiang Xianxia frowned slightly. His domain quickly spread out and completely covered Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was motionless. The shadow transformed by the divine weapon and the shadow transformed by the shadow formula. Dozens of shadows were almost everywhere on this battlefield, which could be called ghostly shadows. The shadows were not dead. Each shadow consciously adjusted its position under Li Tianlan's will. He was not stingy with ruthless energy. With the last afterglow of ruthless, even in Jiang Xianxu's domain, his perception was still clear and sharp. The domain spread steadily. Within the scope of the domain, Jiang Xianxia did not feel anything unusual. Jianghu's mentality seemed to have a huge problem, so that his attention was completely distracted. But Moraid, who had also just brushed shoulders with death, was full of fighting spirit. More than a dozen superiors of the half-step invincible realm, whom Li Tianlan had not taken seriously just now, were gathering quickly. In the air above the domain, the sword energy overlapped. Li Guangtu's body became incomparably illusory in the sword energy, but the illusory sword energy also locked on Li Tianlan. The backup force of Mount Dibing's Heaven Punishment Troop was nothing to worry about. Wang Xingxiao was nothing to worry about. Ruthless energy had been bottomed out. 3 prohibitions. Ruthless resolved the incomparably huge attack at that moment, but it did not cause any harm to them. They only consumed a part of their physical strength. But Li Tianlan had lost Ruthless now, leaving only more than a dozen shadows of Xianyuan Feng. They had lost 2 superiors of the invincible realm, which was indeed a heavy loss. But under such circumstances, facing Li Tianlan, they could almost be said to have an absolute advantage. Deliberately mystifying. Jiang Xianxia looked at Li Tianlan with no expression on his face. This landscape will bury you together, so you won't feel wronged. Ha, Li Tianlan laughed. His sword energy rushed out of Mount Dibing, mixed with the wind and snow, crossed the stage of formidable person, and rushed into Beihai. He did not understand the law of sword Tao, but just now, with the cooperation of Ruthless, when he tried his best to prohibit the sword light and the domain, he suddenly noticed a subtle but almost ubiquitous sword energy. Compared with the incomparably vast sword energy he had just felt in the air, this sword energy was clearer and more real. The most important thing was that even with the cooperation of Ruthless, he could prohibit all the sword light and the domain, but he still could not affect this sword energy that had existed for an unknown period of time. The sword energy had been increasing. The speed was not fast, but it was extremely stable. Li Tianlan finally understood the meaning of Wang Xingxiao's words. Worryless was not in Mount Dibing. He was in Beihai. The so-called Beihai was not Beihai province. It was the Beihai behind the stage of formidable person of Mount Dibing, the boundless sea of Beihai. This was the sword energy that Li Tianlan had been waiting for. He did not expect that in the shortest time, he had reached a certain tacit understanding with the 2 brothers of Beihai at the same time. He looked at Jiang Xianxia with cold eyes, with incomparably firm killing intent. Jiang Xianxia took a step forward. Boom! The night sky, which was scattered by the wind and snow, seemed to be torn apart by Jiang Xianxia at this moment. The space within a radius of thousands of meters was completely broken. Jiang Xianxia stretched out his palm, and countless black thunderbolts suddenly appeared within thousands of meters. The completely violent thunderbolts bared their fangs and brandished their claws, rushing directly to Li Tianlan. The battlefield in Mount Dibing was completely chaotic. In the chaotic void, the sword energy of nothingness turned into the most thorough reality in an instant. Li Guangtu's figure appeared again. He made a gesture with both hands. The ninth sky was endless. This was another change of the 24 moves of sword, a unique skill that simulated other unique skills. This time, what the expressionless Li Guangtu simulated was Li Tianlan's kendo. Cutting the sky. Breaking the sea. Shattering style. One after another, the sword light illuminated the endless black thunderbolts. In the void domain, neither Li Kuangtu nor Jiang Shangyu held back. More than a dozen top experts of the half-step invincible realm joined forces again. But this time, it was no longer an attack. Everyone's aura was connected into one in an instant. Everyone's sword energy, strength, and willpower were constantly superimposed. Moraid's pupils had completely turned into pure silver white. He walked out from behind Jiang Shangyu and perfectly integrated with the power of more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm. His aura temporarily increased wildly in an instant, directly crossing the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm and stopping at the peak of the invincible realm. This was the unique skill of the Holy Zone. It could also be said to be the most powerful unique skill of the Holy Zone in the state of coronation, pure faith. At this moment, more than a dozen experts of the half-step invincible realm gathered almost all their power together and temporarily lent it to Moraid. The extremely powerful aura burst out from every corner. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, Moraid. Siege. It was the highest standard siege in this era. At this moment, they had no other opponents in their eyes except Li Tianlan. Mount Dibing shook violently. A few kilometers away from Mount Dibing, the night trembled slightly. A figure with torn clothes and blood all over his body suddenly walked out of the trembling night. Before his body landed, he coughed violently and spat out mouthfuls of blood. Wang Xiaoyao's face was as pale as paper, and his aura had almost fallen to the bottom. But compared to the most dangerous moment just now, he was still alive. Wang Yuesong couldn't stop his saber. He couldn't stop Wang Yuesong's sword either. So at the moment when they were about to die together, Wang Xiaoyao withdrew from the battlefield. Almost no one noticed his movement. Except Li Tianlan. Because what Wang Xiaoyao used was the unique technique that he had traded with Sword of Emperor Path from Li Tianlan. Shadow Formula. The incomplete version of Shadow Formula. Wang Xiaoyao's shadow was not aggressive, but it could change positions with him. No one knew if this day had been planned for a long time. In short, at that moment, Shadow Formula completely solved Wang Xiaoyao's situation. Li Tianlan, who was extremely sensitive to shadows, found something wrong at the first time and entered the battlefield directly. Wang Xiaoyao didn't want to die. He didn't want to die together. Li Tianlan didn't want Wang Yuesong to die either. So at the moment when Wang Xiaoyao and the shadow changed positions, Li Tianlan appeared beside Wang Yuesong. He didn't know if this could be regarded as a tacit understanding between him and Li Tianlan. But what happened in that instant just now and the result of it undoubtedly satisfied both sides. Wang Xiaoyao laughed. His shadow formula came from Li Tianlan. He believed that Li Tianlan could feel his movement. And the result now, Li Tianlan didn't let him down. In the night, he managed to stand up straight and looked at the chaotic Mount Dibing in the distance. That battlefield might still need his strength. But he had no intention of participating in it. No one knew the outcome of this battle, but Wang Xiaoyao was keenly aware of the danger contained in it. Win or lose, he muttered to himself and shook his head slightly. He had done everything he could. He suppressed Wang Yuesong and created a great opportunity for Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu. As for now, Wang Xiaoyao looked down at his watch. Blood had dyed the dial red. But the needle was still moving tenaciously. It was 6:00 in the morning, Beihai time. The sky was still dark. Wang Xiaoyao took a deep breath and turned to leave. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.